In Dallas, Texas, Tasha Dunnigan is willing to do whatever it takes to provide for her man.
She came under the influence of this man, and he pushed her to become a prostitute.
But when Tasha's fired, her boyfriend talks her into a risky plan of revenge.
When she pulled her gun out and he immediately pulled his, that's when she started shooting.
She had no idea that this was going to ruin her life.
She wanted him to love her, so she'd do whatever he wanted, no matter what he asked.
And later, in Los Angeles, nurse Connie Ickpo is known for her generous ways.
Everybody she came in contact with seemed to think that hers was being the perfect person.
But Connie and her pastor husband aren't as angelic as they seem.
This scheme was driven by unadulterated greed.
So the minute she let Christopher in her life, she starts down this dark and narrow path.
There are hundreds of thousands of women in prison at any given time in the U.S. These are the true stories of women who committed heinous crimes in the name of love. For my man. In Dallas, Texas, Tasha Dunnigan has lived a hard life.
Tasha grew up poor, without a lot of family support. Tasha did not graduate from high school.
With a lack of education, it's not easy for Tasha to find steady work. For the next decade, she moves aimlessly from one low-paying position to another.
She wasn't the type of person that could go out and get a job working as a secretary. So in terms of options on making a living, she was really, really limited.
It limits you because in this market, everybody, for the most part, employers are looking for qualified applicants that have a college degree or higher.
By the age of 34, Tasha meets a handsome, smooth talker named Henry Sanchez, who sweeps her off her feet.
Henry did not have a legal job. He was a low-level drug dealer, and at the time, he was primarily living off of Tasha.
And to pay the bills, Tasha takes a job at a local 24-hour massage parlor.
On the outside, it was a massage parlor. On the inside, it was a brothel.
It was a great opportunity. I think that you should at least take a shot at it.
Henry convinced her that she could make more money than either of them could in any other job if she just started turning tricks.
Tasha was a victim of Henry's control. This was a person who ruled with an iron fist. He was completely in charge. Whatever he wanted, she did. She just couldn't stand up to him.
She really, really just wanted to make some money and make ends meet so that she can pay her bills and do what she needed to do.
Despite the illicit nature of the job, it's the answer to all their money problems.
What is that?
She was making a lot of money every day.
Over 1,000, maybe over 2,000.
And so she would bring that home and give that to Henry.
I'm so proud of you. Imagine how much money you're going to make in the next few weeks.
When you live with someone who pressured you to become a prostitute, it beats you down. She loved him. And no matter how badly he treated her, she wanted him to love her. So she would try harder to do whatever he wanted, no matter what he asked.
That's my girl.
But after only a few months, Henry's gravy train comes to an abrupt halt when Tasha is suspected of pocketing some of the cash she was supposed to hand over to the business for herself.
You do know I need to see all your money.
That is on.
No.
The massage parlor's owner had a business of trust.
That is mine.
I clearly know it isn't.
He didn't want to give Tasha any chances. If he couldn't trust his employees, they were gone out the door right then and there.
So she was fired 2 months after she started working there.
It's a blow to Tasha, but she's more frightened by how Henry will react.
She was really devastated and heartbroken because she was losing the ability to make as much money as she had been making, and she dreaded telling Henry about this.
How are you?
He saw her as a meal ticket. She was someone to send out into the world and say, go make some money and bring it home so I can have shelter and I can have food and I can be with you when I want to.
What's going on?
As suspected, Henry doesn't take the news well.
They fired me.
You gotta be kidding me. What did you do?
Henry was in a fit of rage when he found out that she was fired.
You have to fix this.
After all, you know, she used to make a lot of cash that she wasn't making anymore.
What am I going to do?
I don't know. I need some time to think.
With their primary source of income gone, Tasha and Henry are back to struggling to pay their bills. A few weeks after the dismissal, they're in dire straits.
This is an eviction notice.
Financial situation had gotten to a point where they were about to be evicted from their apartment.
Pay the rent?
Tasha didn't have any place to go. Henry didn't have any place to go. They were very desperate for money.
You lost your job last week, and I told you we got to do something about it. Did you go back?
His anger built and built, and he decided he wanted to get even with the people who took away their means of support.
No, it was my money.
Well, maybe we should.
No, we're going to do that.
Facing eviction, Henry comes up with a plan that will solve all of their problems in one fell swoop.
Henry has an idea that will get revenge on Tasha's boss and also get them the cash they so desperately needed.
We got to make this right.
He's going to hold up the massage parlor. Because of the nature of the business, a robbery would go unreported.
Because it was such a cover for a prostitution house, they certainly thought that if something like this were to happen, they wouldn't call the police.
You work there. You know
That, coupled with Tasha's first-hand knowledge of the operation, will make it an easy score.
during the day or what?
Tasha knew the best time to go there. She also knew the layout of the building. She knew that they had no safe. And the way the money worked is the managers would keep the money in their pocket.
I mean, we would have to force.
But Tasha will need some convincing.
How would we do that? They have guns.
Tasha said she didn't want to hurt anyone. He kept pushing her and pushing her and pushing her until she said yes.
Tasha felt like she had to do what Henry wanted her to do. She wanted to please him, keep him happy.
2 or 3 guys I've seen.
Tasha tells him the place is like a fortress. You need an appointment and need to be buzzed in.
The way that it works is that they knock on the door, an armed manager comes and escorts them inside. There, they find a girl that they would like to have the massage services with. And then once the service is completed, then payment is taken.
But you could go.
The plan was for Tasha to show up. She knew that the door was going to be locked and tell them that she had lost her cell phone charger. And then once inside, she was supposed to go to the back of the building and open a back door for Henry.
What about the gun?
Once Henry is inside, he will demand that the night manager hand over all the night's cash earnings. He doesn't want to take any chances with the armed proprietor, so he asks his cousin to go along for the ride.
So what's going on?
He got his cousin involved so he could have one more gun with him. One more gun means more control over what's going to happen once they're inside.
They would have the manpower to scare or perhaps overpower the one manager and make him give up the cash.
That's the best way to go.
We're gonna get this, Tasha.
It seems like the perfect plan, but Tasha's not so convinced.
She felt compelled. She had no other choice. She was facing eviction. They had no money. Tasha hopes that if she does exactly what Henry wants, nobody's going to get hurt.
A few days later, the trio puts their plan into action.
Tasha.
At sunrise, Henry hands Tasha a .38 caliber gun to put in her purse, and they drive over to the massage parlor a few miles from their home.
Robbing the place early in the morning also would have meant that the manager on duty would have had all the cash from their busiest time on hand. And since all their cash just went into the manager's pocket, at the end of that shift, it all would have just been sitting there, ripe for the picking.
Once on scene, everyone moves into position. Tasha rings the bell at the front door.
The manager looks out the window and sees Tasha at the door and lets her inside.
Tasha doesn't miss a beat, even when she spots another girl at the desk.
The only other person who was in the building when Tasha arrived is her friend Maria, who is another worker. And she had just come off her shift, and she was in the lobby area waiting for her ride.
Did you need something?
Yeah, actually, I think I left my charger here.
Tasha says that she can't find her cell phone charger. She thinks it might be there somewhere. So could she please look around? And he says sure.
Outside, Henry and Timothy stand by for Tasha to open the rear door. Inside, Tasha keeps the lost charger distraction going, so she works her way toward the back. But there's a problem.
The night manager happened to look out a window, and he saw Henry and his cousin leaning up against a wall with their guns out like they were trying to hide.
And that's when Henry's perfect plan begins to fall apart. And what happens next will send Tasha's world into a death spiral.
What are you doing?
Unlock it.
They thought that this was going to be easy in, easy out. They thought that anything like this would happen.
Henry was everything to her. She was willing to risk everything for him.
The two of them together were double trouble.
In Dallas, Texas, just a few months after 34-year-old Tasha Dunnigan is fired from her job at a massage parlor, she lets her boyfriend Henry Sanchez talk her into getting revenge via armed robbery.
There were very strong elements of control and dominance in this relationship. And so if Tasha really wanted to stay with him, there were just certain rules that she had to abide by. So I think that it really took her down a wrong path. I don't know if she would have normally done had she not been with him and in this relationship.
They're desperate for money, and in his mind, this is the perfect plan to come up with quick money.
With their plan underway, Tasha waits for the right opportunity to let her boyfriend and his cousin, Timothy Johnson, inside.
It might be in the bag. Yeah. We can check.
There were no customers there at that time. It was just the manager and one of the girls that worked there.
But out of the gate, Henry's plan starts to unravel.
The night manager had noticed Henry and Timothy outside, so he was suspicious.
Suspicious, the manager senses a security risk.
And to protect Tasha, he takes her to the back door to let her out safely.
He opens the back door and he looks out and he sees two guys coming toward him.
The night manager quickly slams the door shut and locks it.
When he turns around, he sees Tasha holding a gun to him.
What are you doing?
Unlock it.
And he says, "Please don't do this."
Is this what you wanted to do?
And he begs her to back down, and she doesn't.
Instead, the night manager pulls out his own gun.
Tasha was scared. Things weren't going the way they're supposed to.
Tasha panicked once the manager refused to comply with her demand to open the back door.
Henry was waiting for her to unlock the door, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen.
Even if it means pulling the trigger.
The manager is shot in the stomach and he falls to the ground. At that point, Tasha runs away to let her accomplices in.
Tasha is so rattled at this point because she doesn't know whether the manager is alive or dead. And so the only thing she can focus on is making sure that Henry and Timothy can get into the back door. And whatever she does, she wants to make sure that Henry's plan is met to the letter.
Tasha, did you shoot him?
Tasha's former co-worker, Maria, watches in horror as the horrific scene unfolds in front of her.
She's hysterical.
Where's the money, man?
You know, she's really upset. She has no idea what was happening, and she now is a witness.
Where's the money, man? Come on. We're not joking, man.
The manager is wounded but still alive and takes cover.
I don't know where the money is.
He retreated to behind a counter that was there in the business, kind of used as a shield for himself.
Come on, man. Just give us the money.
With money on their mind, the robbers stick to the plan.
Henry and Timothy approach the manager and ask for the money.
I don't know where the money is.
And the manager says no, and they start a shootout.
When the bullets start flying, Maria cowers in fear.
So she was a liability. Timothy takes her into another room where he shoots her in the stomach.
Tasha's worst fears are coming true.
Tasha must have been scared out of her wits. She had so many things coming down on her.
Meanwhile, the gunfight between Henry and the manager spins out of control. And Henry is hit in the leg. The would-be robbers have no choice but to retreat empty-handed.
The whole plan had gone south. Henry was shot. He was bleeding profusely.
Still hidden behind the counter, the night manager calls 911.
I don't think they're expecting the night manager to defend himself or defend the business as ferociously as he did.
Drive!
Timothy and Tasha get Henry back to the car.
We gotta get him to the hospital.
No, hospital, no.
Tasha gets behind the wheel, but tries desperately to keep her wits about her.
The one thing she was really scared of came true. People got hurt. The manager was shot, her coworker Maria was shot, and now her partner, her significant other Henry, was shot.
With Henry bleeding out, Tasha can barely keep the car on the road.
So they realized that Henry's condition was life-threatening, and it wasn't as easy as just running away. They had to seek medical assistance.
Tasha finds herself in a no-win situation.
No!
Yes!
No, no, hospital.
We have to go!
No!
Henry needs medical help. He's been shot in the leg, but at the same time, they need to hide from the police. So Tasha has a decision to make. Is this about her own safety and Henry not getting the medical attention, or getting Henry to a doctor or an emergency room at the peril of being caught?
This was not supposed to happen.
You gotta get to the hospital.
And do not go to the hospital.
He thought it would be an easy in and out job. Tasha did all of this in the end for the love of her man.
And later in Los Angeles, Connie Ikpo's man will give her a taste of the good life by having her make a deal with the devil.
So the minute she let Christopher in her life, she starts down this dark and narrow path.
This is a shell game, and Connie's an active participant. In fact, she's just all in.
Tasha Dunnigan has to choose between saving her boyfriend's life or getting away after a botched revenge robbery attempt in Dallas, Texas.
No hospital. This was not supposed to happen.
You gotta get to the hospital.
Against her accomplice Timothy's objections, Tasha drives straight to the emergency room.
Tasha wanted to save Henry no matter what the risk. If Tasha didn't care about Henry, she could have just taken him home and said, we'll try to get the bullet out.
I told you not to come here, Tasha.
We had to come.
No, just leave. Go somewhere else.
Nurse, please. Please.
No.
When they get to the hospital and pull over, Timothy flees. He runs.
That's when she realizes she's on her own.
Timothy knew that once they got to the hospital would call the police to report a gunshot victim.
Doctor, please help
But Tasha doesn't care.
Tasha's emotional state at that point was primarily focused on getting Henry to the hospital and trying to make sure he doesn't die there in the car.
No, please help.
Tasha loved Henry, and she did everything for him, and he's the reason that she did this. So she wasn't going to let him die, but she also risked her life by deciding to save him.
Somebody tried to carjack us.
You know how long
To cover their tracks, she lies to the hospital staff, saying they're the victims of a carjacking.
She's a survivor, so she comes up with an explanation as to what happened.
But what Tasha doesn't know is that the night manager at the massage parlor has survived, and he's called 911.
When the police arrive, they find Maria dead. The manager was able to identify Tasha and tell them exactly what happened.
I locked the door.
The manager was able to give the police her name and the description of the two men.
This description is almost identical to the report the hospital has already provided the authorities.
Henry has a gunshot wound, and it's hospital's protocol that when something like that happens, they automatically have to notify the police department.
At the crime scene, they get a report of 3 people showing up at the hospital, one of them with a serious gunshot wound, and they put 2 and 2 together pretty quickly.
By the time Henry is wheeled into surgery, Tasha is already in custody.
She chose to stay with Henry at the hospital. She knew they were probably going to get caught. I think that also kind of shows how deep her involvement with him was.
Tasha's whole world comes crumbling down on her because she doesn't know whether Henry's going to make it.
Why don't you tell me the truth?
Under interrogation, Tasha stands her ground.
My car.
Tasha tries her best to stick to the carjacking story, but there's too many holes in the story.
I don't know. We were carjacked.
But the news of Maria's passing definitely hits a nerve.
Maria's dead, and Tasha doesn't know whether she's going to prison for this. So Tasha's got to be devastated.
Tasha was very remorseful about Maria getting killed. In fact, Tasha had talked about how good a friend Maria had been to her during the time that she worked there.
And police have one more ace up their sleeve.
When a police officer tells Tasha that the night manager identified her as the woman involved in the robbery, she breaks down.
Place for the scene of the crime. Look, maybe I was there. You know this.
After hours of questioning, Tasha finally admits to shooting the night manager at the massage parlor.
He drew a gun on me.
But claims that he drew his gun on her first.
She admitted to shooting him, but she said that she did it in self-defense.
I was going to leave out the back door.
And when push comes to shove, Tasha finally turns on her man.
This is all Henry's fault.
She points the blame on Henry because it was his idea and he was the one who really started all of this. He was the one that convinced her of what happened and convinced her that they needed to seek revenge. And so she really blamed everything on him.
Like the night manager, Henry Sanchez survives his wounds and is arrested promptly after he is in stable condition. 2 days later, police track down Timothy Johnson hiding out in a Dallas motel.
The police had gotten a tip from someone on where he was, and that's where they found him.
A year after the robbery, a Dallas jury convicts Tasha Dunnigan of capital murder. She's handed down a tough punishment: life in prison without parole. Her boyfriend Henry Sanchez and his cousin Timothy Johnson each get the same.
This was really about her relationship with Henry. Under other circumstances, I don't know if she would have done this on her own. So she really did it all for him.
Tasha felt like she had to do what Henry wanted her to do. She wanted to please him, keep him happy, and he was just a very bad influence on her.
So many women get involved in bad situations. They do things for what they think is love, and they ruin other people's lives and they ruin their own lives.
Prison has a way of allowing people to think. I mean, after all, you have nothing but time on your hands.
And I walked to the bag, he walked with me.
She was now far removed from that very domineering, dominating relationship that she was in with Henry. So she finally does come to the proper realization that he led her down a path of danger and a really screwed up life.
Trying to keep her boyfriend happy with a fistful of cash destroyed Tasha Dunnigan's life. In Los Angeles, Connie Ikpo is all about getting money for nothing in the name of everlasting love. Even from a young age, Connie seemed destined to be an overachiever.
Connie was raised in Nigeria, a very hardworking single-parent mother who raised her kids to be very hardworking. They were very pressed on getting an education, which they all seem to do.
By her early 20s, Connie becomes a nurse in Nigeria, helping those in need.
She was industrious. She was well-liked. She was a hard worker.
A decade later, Connie yearns for more. And during a fateful trip to America, she decides to take a leap of faith in Houston, Texas.
She came to visit a cousin of hers who was living there, and she got interest in wanting to stay, enrolling in the university there.
The 35-year-old immediately gets to work, building a whole new life for herself by continuing her education in the healthcare field.
She was confident, she was responsible. She was in school for something all the time, whether it was a bachelor's degree, which she needed to get here in the United States, or her master's degree, which she did complete.
Connie is like a lot of immigrants who come to this country. They come for a better opportunity. She knows what she wants. She knows what she has to do, even if it means working harder than her peers.
But Connie's also determined to enjoy her new life by spending time with friends and relatives. And it's during one of these gatherings where Connie is introduced to a fellow Nigerian who's in town visiting from California.
Christopher was a Nigerian citizen, migrated to the United States, seemed to be somewhat successful in the hair salon business in Los Angeles.
The two instantly bond over their mutual desire to help those less fortunate.
They both were in the same community circles. He was doing volunteer work, which certainly appealed to Connie's nurturing, caregiving side.
Is this when you were in Nigeria?
Connie's attracted to Christopher primarily because they share the same culture. They both come from Nigeria. He's been in the States longer than she has, so he's already started working and making something of himself. He's achieved some success. And for her, this is the ideal guy. This is a man who is ambitious just like she is.
Shortly after their first meeting, Christopher returns to LA. But the distance only makes their love grow stronger.
They had a long-distance telephonic relationship for a number of months, and other subsequent visits. Finally, she moved to Los Angeles and they moved in together.
He immediately proposes. They go back to Nigeria to be married, and they come back to LA to begin their lives.
Connie quickly settles into her new life with Christopher. She takes a job as a nurse, and Christopher continues to run his successful hair salons. But the couple isn't satisfied with just achieving their own personal success. They want to make a difference in the world.
Christopher and Connie were already very well respected in their communities.
And Christopher already knows how he wants to give back. He tells Connie he wants them to become ordained ministers and open a storefront church.
They convert one of the salons into their church. Connie likes the idea of becoming a pastor.
People call them Pastor Chris and Pastor Connie, and the name of their church was Arms of Grace Church.
But when Connie puts her faith in her man over God, her sins will destroy her life forever.
Christopher and Connie are not the angels that they thought they were.
And their church will become the perfect cover for $1 million bamboozle, for which Satan himself would be proud.
This scheme was driven by unadulterated greed.
Nigerian immigrant Connie Ikpo is living the American dream in Los Angeles, California. Not only has she married the love of her life, Christopher Iruke, but her husband is determined to share their good fortune through a storefront ministry.
It was a church that opened its arms up to a community that was in need, a community that looked like people that were coming from that part of the third world, coming from Africa, coming from Latin America, looking for a church home.
And Connie works around the clock to make sure nothing in her life falls through the cracks.
Connie was busy doing everything. She's busy at work. She's busy with the church, doing food drives. She's trying to do it all.
There's a part of Connie who wants to prove to Christopher that she can do the hard work. So she's doing everything that she can to get this church up and going, because at the end of the day, she really wants to please him.
2 years after the church opens its doors, the pews are packed.
God is good, not just Sunday. God is good.
And the couple adds to their responsibilities by bringing a new addition into the family.
Connie and Christopher, they had a girl that they adopted from Nigeria. They're both working. They have the church. And on top of that, they're trying to raise a child. And they're making it all look easy.
So easy that Christopher decides to start a ministry to serve those with disabilities. A healthcare company named Pascon.
The medical supply company that Christopher opens actually provides medical supplies to folks that need them.
It's the same community which their church serves as well. For Christopher, it's synergy. With his skilled wife at his side, Christopher is confident that Pascon will be a success.
There's a lot going on in Connie's life, and certainly a lot on her plate. She does want to help the community, but even more importantly, she wants to help her man. She wants to help Christopher reach his vision.
Their main customers are Medicare beneficiaries.
Medicare is typically for those that are of low or below income and that do not have medical insurance or over the age of 65.
At first, the business seems to stall.
Any new business typically will have a slow start because you're brand new, no one knows you're there.
But then as word gets out, the customers begin to trickle in. And the company's biggest ticket item is a powered wheelchair with a hefty $6,000 price tag.
If I was a member of the community and I had medical insurance, I could go to Connie or Chris and say that I have been prescribed to have a wheelchair. And can you get that for me?
Now, to need a power wheelchair, you need to have serious medical conditions. It needs to be based on the prescription of a doctor who thinks that you need it.
To capitalize on their most profitable item, Christopher starts purchasing large quantities of these wheelchairs at wholesale prices.
They get a wheelchair for $1,000 wholesale. They pay another $1,000, and then Medicaid reimburses them $6,000 for the actual chair itself, and they end up pocketing the remainder of that money.
Thank you. All right. Welcome, sir. I'll see you soon. All right.
And Christopher starts seeing a profit of thousands of dollars a wheelchair. In fact, the venture is doing so well that Christopher wants to open a second company, and he wants Connie at its helm as sole owner and CEO.
Connie opened up the second company called Horizon. which did the same exact business. She was the 100% owner, the manager, the operator of it.
And between the two companies, over the next year, the money starts rolling in.
They bought a nice house in a very nice neighborhood in Los Angeles. They both drove nice Mercedes. They sent money overseas to buy real estate.
It is the American dream. So everything seems to be going just the way they want it to go.
You go from going to work every day as a nurse to becoming a millionaire. Very drastic lifestyle change.
Connie couldn't be happier with their newfound fortune. But behind their success, the couple is hiding a dirty little secret.
As it turns out, it's all a scam. They are committing a fraud.
Christopher has figured out how to make that money, and Connie's gotten a taste of the good life, and now she is hooked. So now she is going to follow her husband's lead.
Can investigators bring their ride on Easy Street to a dead end before they cover their tracks? Los Angeles church leaders Connie Ikpo and Christopher Iruke live the good life after opening two successful medical supply companies.
They provide in mobile wheelchairs, and they would submit those claims to Medicare.
For each wheelchair, they're making $4,000. Over time, this is millions of dollars. And it looks to everyone as they're building an empire.
But what these angelic entrepreneurs have really built is a house of lies.
They are committing a fraud. They are selling wheelchairs to people who just don't need them.
It was a get-rich scheme by ripping off Medicare, which operates on the honor system and is vulnerable to disreputable people.
While they keep up their appearances at their church, they no longer keep up the facade of the medical supply company.
It was a medical supply company that had no walk-in clients, no cash register, not the type of thing that you would expect to see if they had a legitimate business supplying medical supplies to the public.
It's a complicated scheme that works in two demographics. First, the couple lies to potential patients, conning them into buying wheelchairs that they don't need.
They would tell community members that Medicare was going bankrupt, and so that they would not be able to meet their immediate medical needs, and they may want to go ahead and buy a wheelchair now.
Some patients did receive the wheelchair. When you would go to their house to look at it, it would typically be parked in the garage or a corner of the house, collecting dust and never having been used.
And if their targets can't be persuaded to actually purchase a chair, they pay them for their personal information.
A lot of times they would also, just in exchange for their name and social security number, buy them things that they needed.
Even worse, they're taking advantage of the same group of people they claim to be helping, poor immigrants, many of which are members of their own congregation.
There's a number of things that made them so easy to convince. There was a language barrier. They're immigrants. They're not really familiar with how processes work. They're pastors in the church, and that they're from a vulnerable population. Someone that is very respected in your community asks you, then of course you're going to comply.
In phase 2, Christopher buys up bogus prescriptions from shady doctors to submit to Medicare.
Doctors are being paid who are signing off on these false prescriptions.
Once people start getting large amounts of money from Medicare just by filling out some fraudulent paperwork and delivering wheelchairs, it's a lot of money really quickly, and it's hard to stop.
And it isn't just Christopher getting his hands dirty. Connie is supporting her man's illegal deeds every step of the way.
She was just as involved, submitting the documents that she needed, which means that she's fully aware that she's paying a middle person for the prescription.
In Connie's mind, she can justify what's going on with this illegal activity. They're sending money back to family in Nigeria, and they're making a difference in their community.
Over the next 3 years, the couple continues to preach about sin, but commit it on a regular basis. And it's their blatant disregard for appearances that finally puts their medical supply businesses on investigators' radar.
As you dig into some of these companies, indicators of fraud become apparent. For example, a company that's only delivering one type of equipment, as in this case, the most expensive possible equipment, power wheelchairs, and not delivering manual wheelchairs, canes, walkers, other types of things that you would expect to see a legitimate company to supply. They were finding trouble with the billings, and they were questioning the necessity of the wheelchairs that they were being delivered.
The investigators begin looking for proof, prescriptions, that all of these wheelchairs are attached to people who truly need them.
With investigators hot on their heels, Connie and Christopher will stop at nothing to protect their lavish lifestyle.
It was too late now for Connie to back out. She was now entangled in a web of lies.
I don't think she was willing to get caught.
Pastors Connie Ikpo and Christopher Iruke's Medicare scam has made them millions of dollars. And the couple is desperate to keep living the dream in Los Angeles.
Chris Iruke and Connie Ikpo were greedy, and they wanted to get as much money as possible, and they weren't going to let the Medicare rules and regulations or anything else get in their way.
Connie's got a lot to lose. She's worked so hard for everything, and she's afraid of losing all of that. But more importantly, she's afraid of losing Christopher. And that's why she's gone along with that scam.
Look, we got to do something to help ourselves.
Alerted that Medicare officials are on the lookout for them, Connie and Christopher try to stay one step ahead of investigators.
They begin to now understand that they are really being scrutinized and that they now are going to have to begin to do some things to keep themselves out of jail.
Panicked, the couple closes the businesses in an attempt to throw investigators off their trail. But they aren't about to turn their back on their millions.
After shutting down Pascon and Horizon, Christopher opens up 2 new stores and just picks up where he left off.
They know that they can't put the new companies in their names, so they cover their tracks and recruit others into their scheme.
They use 2 names from members of parishioners of their church.
They open a new storefront and get back to business as usual.
It's a cat and mouse game. They're trying to avoid getting caught, and they do that by operating under different ownership. Medicare would have no way of knowing, based on the paperwork, that these were all Christopher Iruke and Connie Ikpo's company. They would appear to be other people's companies who don't have the same issues.
And that, again, is another scam.
Connie really should put her foot down, but instead, she's just going to blindly follow along with this scheme.
For the next 6 months, the plan seems to work, until Christopher gets a call from one of his employees.
An investigator shows up to the medical supply store asking for Chris. Of course, the folks that are there give him, no information whatsoever, but do get word to Chris that there is an investigator that's looking for him.
Christopher calls an emergency meeting with their co-conspirators in a park down the street from his house. He's got to figure out how to cover their tracks.
What I do know is that we're in this together.
They give them instructions about not to talk to the police. They give them what we would call throw phones. They come up with code words.
Christopher orders everyone to use their untraceable phones and not to tell police. But what he isn't aware of is investigators have been digging into the couple's lies.
Myself and the agents would go interview some of these beneficiaries who bought wheelchairs, and they would do jumping jacks for us. And so these aren't the types of people that need the power wheelchairs.
A week later, investigators prepare to strike. And Connie and Christopher realize the clock is running out. So they try to erase any evidence connecting them to the scam.
At some point, the medical records were all moved into the church.
Connie spearheads the shredding party. She gathers parishioners and pays them to begin shredding files.
If they get caught, not only is she going to lose this lifestyle that she's become accustomed to, but she's going to lose her man, and that's something that is not on the table for her.
But the feds are waiting. After months of watching them, with a search warrant, they raid the church.
And they seized all the records, including the shredded documents.
Finally, Connie Ikpo and Christopher Iruke are arrested and charged with Medicare fraud.
Connie and Chris have never admitted to their crimes. They both have maintained their innocence.
6 months after her arrest, Connie is convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Christopher is also convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud and 17 counts of healthcare fraud. He's sentenced to 15 years in prison.
They both are responsible for $6.7 million, I believe, to reimburse the government.
Connie took a vow to honor her husband for richer and for poorer, and she took that oath very seriously.
Christopher is the one that led her down this path. He introduced her to the business of Medicare fraud, and I don't think she would have thought of this on her own.
Everybody loved Connie. So obviously this would be a grave shock to the community that she supported for so long.
She certainly at any time could have stopped. She could have shut the whole thing down, but she chose not to. I think the true victims are, unfortunately, the community members of their church.
Teenager Courtney Brantley is raised by a single mother in a chaotic household.
Courtney grew up in East Tampa. She had a rough upbringing, and she spent a lot of time with her grandmother, and they had a really tight and close relationship.
When you go to your grandmother's house, what happens? Get away with anything. And that's kind of where Courtney was.
By the time Courtney is in high school, she's struggling, both in school and in her personal life.
Even though she tried to stay focused on her studies, she got distracted with partying and drinking, and by the time she reached her junior year, she dropped out of school.
Courtney didn't have an easy childhood. This is a young lady who grew up in a very tough, difficult neighborhood. She tried to choose the right path, but it was really an uphill battle for her.
Now a high school dropout, Courtney spends her days surrounded by trouble.
She started hanging out with a really rough crowd in East Tampa. It was the kind of people you would never want your kid to be hanging out with.
She's in the projects, then she kind of found herself in the midst of just all of that chaos.
One day, she's hanging out with some friends when good-looking street-hard hustler Dante Morris steps up to the younger girl, full of swagger.
He started off like your typical young male, where he was this esteemed athlete. He also was a part of a rap group, and they cut a couple of tracks, which was pretty cool, so he was kind of known for that.
But spitting verses is more of a side project for Dante. It's the game in the streets that puts paper in his pocket.
Dante was very popular in East Tampa, but it was for all the wrong reasons.
He was the man in East Tampa and had a reputation in the community, so she was just enamored by that bad boy swagger.
And as she gets to know the dapper dealer, she learns he also has a tender side. In fact, thanks to their difficult childhoods, the two have a lot in common.
They would talk about things that they wouldn't necessarily be able to talk about with anyone else. And so they had a really balanced relationship.
Courtney saw someone that not everyone got a chance to see on a daily basis. She saw someone who actually opened up to her.
And while their relationship grows, the Tampa Kingpin's drug empire is also expanding.
He became more territorial and engaged and involved in turf wars, and Dante became more aggressive.
The dangerous dealer rules his crew with an iron fist. And along the way, police haul him in for a variety of offenses, from cocaine possession to manufacturing and distribution.
Sometimes Dante would be locked up for 24 hours. Other times, his length of time in jail would be from 4 to 6 months.
But while Dante is in and out of jail, Courtney starts to examine her own choices.
Dante's ever-growing rap sheet actually had a positive influence on Courtney. She started getting her life right, looked inside herself to see what she wanted to do better, went and got her GED, even started working.
Despite her best efforts to improve her life, for Courtney, her handsome hustler is not unlike the drugs he sells. She simply cannot stay away from him.
Courtney was hooked on Dante. She was not going to let him go. Even when he was in prison, she still cared for him and remained loyal to him.
Courtney really loved Dante, but deep down inside, she knew that this guy was really up to no good. But no matter what happened, no matter how illegal, no matter how bad, they were going to stick together. It's clear he had a hold on her.
One March morning, about 2 years into their rocky relationship, Dante is out in the streets when police cruisers come speeding around the corner and put the Kingpin in cuffs yet again for a probation violation. And this time, the repeat offender will be going away for a while.
The more crimes you do, the more time you get. And so now we're not looking at 4 months, but we're looking at 27 months.
While Dante was incarcerated, Courtney focused herself, and she got 2 jobs and enrolled in community college.
But no matter how much Courtney works on herself, there's one thing that will never change: her devotion to Dante.
She continued to support him while he was behind bars. Whatever bond these two had, being in prison made it stronger.
After being locked up for more than 2 years, he's finally released. And they pick up right where they left off.
After Dante was released from prison, they spent every moment together. They were hot and heavy, and Courtney thought it would stay like that.
But the honeymoon doesn't last long.
He went right back to his old habits. He's back on the streets with his crew, doing the same things he was doing before he went into jail.
He had to reassert himself in the streets, and that became his #1 priority. And Courtney was not prepared for that.
Adding fuel to the fire, over the next few weeks, there's some disturbing talk around town.
So Courtney started to hear these rumors that were kind of navigating through East Tampa that Dante was connected to the murder of 3 individuals in the area.
Girl, who told you that?
And Courtney decided, you know, I'm gonna turn a blind eye.
But he's not a killer. He wouldn't do that. No.
Courtney really felt that Dante was the best thing in her life, and he felt the same way about her. So at this point, she was in complete denial about those murders, and the last thing she wanted to do was face the reality as to who this person really was.
But the lovesick girl won't be able to live in her fantasy world for long. Late one night at around 1 a.m., Dante is out drinking and partying at a club when he decides he's had enough and wants to go home.
Dante called Courtney to come pick him up, and being the loyal woman that she is, she got up and went to the club and picked up Dante.
They were on their way to Dante's house, and at some point during that trip, a police officer pulls up behind them, lights flashing.
Dante told Courtney not to pull over right away, so she drove about a half-mile more and then pulled over.
Officer David Curtis gets out of his vehicle, goes to the driver's side of the car, and was asking about the expired license tag on Courtney's car, and that's why they were being pulled over.
They talked for a few minutes about the tag, and eventually she gave him her driver's license and registration, and then after speaking to Courtney for a few moments, the officer turned his attention to Dante.
Sir, what's your name? Dante.
He asked Dante who he was, what his name was. Dante mumbled just a little bit in the beginning, and then the officer asked him again. He finally said, "My name is Dante Morris," and spelled it out for him.
The officer tells the couple to sit tight while he checks them out.
The entire time the officer is in his patrol car running all of the information, Dante continues to look in the rearview mirror to check behind him. He's getting even more panicked as the seconds go on, because in his mind, the police had figured out he was the one who had committed those murders, and now they're on to him.
Courtney's trying to massage him and calm him down and basically let him know everything's okay, just calm down, we'll get through this.
Moments later, a second officer, Jeffrey Kokab, arrives on the scene. And the already alarmed drug dealer comes completely unhinged.
He turns to Courtney and he says to her, "I can't go back. I'm not going back." And it was at that moment Courtney noticed that Dante had a gun strapped to his waist. As soon as Courtney saw he was strapped, he pulled his shirt down to cover the gun.
Dante is like, it's going down. This is serious. I'm not going back to prison. That's not an option for me.
Officer Kokab and Officer Curtis started walking up to the passenger side where Dante was sitting.
Excuse me, sir. I'm gonna need you to step out of the vehicle.
He got out, turned towards the officers.
Turn around, put your hands on the hood.
As he turned around, he pulled the gun out of his waistband and quickly shot both officers at point-blank range.
Courtney screams Dante's name in rage.
Get out of here! Get out of here!
Dante ran into a field and didn't look back.
Courtney didn't know what to do, so she just pressed the accelerator and took off.
Moments later, Courtney's cell phone rings, and it's Dante. He wants to make sure she doesn't snitch.
No, I'm not gonna talk to the cops.
He tells her to head to a friend's apartment and to hide the car. Terrified, she does what she's told.
Courtney was in total and complete shock when she saw that Dante had murdered these officers point blank, but she was prepared to stand by him no matter what the consequences were. She would do anything to protect him.
Yes, I understand.
Have you ever heard of the term, snitches get stitches? Well, there's a reason for that. He didn't call her to find out if she was okay. He didn't call her to explain to her what had happened. He wanted to make sure that Courtney was not going to snitch.
Aware of what's at stake, the faithful girlfriend obeys. She drives to a friend's apartment 3 miles away from the shooting and stashes her car. She texts her man the moment it's done.
Courtney proved her loyalty by saying, "Till death do us part." It was a vow they had never taken in a church. It was a vow they had never taken for the state, but it was something that she was saying to him. She wanted Dante to know, "I'm here forever, no matter what."
The city of Tampa has been rocked to the core. As the entire force mourns its 2 fallen officers, investigators get to work. When they arrive on the scene, they find an overwhelming amount of evidence, including Courtney's license, the officer's notepad with Dante's full name, and a dashcam video that has a clear image of the 2 perps. Dante and Courtney are instantly the most wanted people in Florida.
The manhunt was like nothing Tampa had seen ever before. They had lost 2 of their own, and now there was a killer on the loose who did not care about human life.
10 hours after officers Curtis and Kokab are shot in cold blood, police spot Courtney's red car in an apartment building parking lot. Police officers go door to door, searching for the killers. They are closing in on Courtney, who has been hiding out at her friend's apartment.
When they finally knocked on the door where Courtney was, she came to the door and she actually admitted that she was the person they were looking for and that she was at the scene of the murder. She was quite composed and cooperated with the law enforcement.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
Courtney is hauled in for questioning. Detectives sweat her for over 6 hours. But Courtney can't be swayed. She made a vow to Dante and is staying loyal.
Who was with you? I do not know.
During the entire questioning process, Courtney refused to turn on Dante. She was asked more than 100 times to give up the name of the person she was with, and she wouldn't do it.
I'm not giving him up.
Despite extreme pressure, Courtney never breaks. And while police are getting nowhere with the loyal girlfriend, her cop-killing boyfriend is still at large.
There were so many officers, authorities from different areas and different agencies all trying to catch Dante Morris. There was even a $100,000 reward being offered for anyone who could help with his capture.
The police knew that this man was a street man. He was a drug dealer. So they took to the street to find him. And there was one dealer who was more than happy to talk. And he told them exactly where they can find Dante Morris.
Dante was located at his lawyer's office and finally arrested after 4 days being on the run.
He's charged with the murder of both officers. And his gun is also linked to 2 of the other murders that Courtney had written off as mere rumor.
And with that, they were able to connect Dante to those other murders.
He is convicted in each of those cases and is given multiple death sentences. And Courtney faces a rarely used offense.
Courtney was charged with misprison of a felony, something a lot of people don't hear about often, but basically that means she failed to report knowing about a felony that took place.
Courtney manages to spend the next 5 years out of prison fighting her case, and in the process becomes a local sensation.
She became this popular media girl who was seen as, fighting her case and kind of going back and forth with the court systems. But eventually she ended up being charged and sentenced to 1 year and 1 day.
He was a selfish man. If he really cared about Courtney.
Courtney Brantley did everything in her power to protect her man right up to the bitter end. But in Indiana, How far is Regina Miller willing to go to clean up her new boyfriend's mess? In the small town of Muncie, Indiana, 36-year-old Regina Miller is doing all she can just to get by.
Regina was a single mother. She worked off and on for various stretches of time to provide for her and her family.
These days, she's on her feet for 10-hour shifts at the local diner.
It was stressful trying to make ends meet with her children and just having a waitressing job. She was living day to day, trying to afford her bills and try to take care of the kids.
And the young mother has a lot of mouths to feed.
She had multiple kids, although she wasn't very old. Because she started having kids so young, she had kids from elementary all the way up until the kids that were in the 20s.
Her 20-year-old son does his best to help out with the younger ones while she's at work. But for the most part, Regina is on her own.
Her house was pretty much in disarray, mattresses on the floor for the kids, food, and a lot of dirty dishes. They had very little.
Regina has never had a consistent man in her life.
She would meet a guy, she would fall in love, and then she would get pregnant. And those guys never really stuck around.
There are some women who perhaps have poor self-esteem. They feel that they don't deserve a really good man in their lives. We see that they look for the excitement in someone who has an edge, someone who can take them out of that humdrum existence that they have.
But the struggling mom is not ready to give up on love.
She still held out hope that one day she would find Mr. Right, and Mr. Right would not only accept her, but also accept all of her kids.
Life finally starts to look up for Regina when she lucks upon the perfect house to rent for her growing family. Not only is it bigger, but it's cheaper.
She finally found a place where all of her kids had comfortable space, everybody could live in that house, and they loved that place.
The single mother is settling into her new digs when one day a young, handsome stranger comes into her life. Her new landlord's 24-year-old nephew, Terry Rutledge.
The landlord came over to Regina's house, and Terry came with him, and that's how they met.
She found him to be engaging and fun. He had a muscular type build. He was charming, a good time, fun to be with.
The attractive younger man appears to be full of swagger and charisma, but in reality, he's no saint with a lengthy rap sheet.
We were familiar with Terry Rutledge, and he had a record here in Muncie with domestic battery and theft.
Terry has recently been released from prison and has been crashing at his uncle's home. But his shady past doesn't bother the older woman, who is 12 years his senior.
Regina knew that Terry had been in prison, and she was obviously okay with that.
And Regina is just the ex-con's type.
He loved older women, and when he saw Regina, he knew he had to have her.
Regina most likely accepted Terry, one, because he was someone who can take her away from that very boring life, but the other part of that, being that she was a loving mom, he had showed an interest in her children, and this, for her, was the complete package.
The couple have a clear chemistry, and it's not long before their sexual tension turns into a physical relationship.
Normally, Regina would be hesitant to bring a guy around her kids, especially so soon. But something about Terry, he seemed to like her kids, seemed to have a good relationship with them.
One thing is clear, the young mom is head over heels for her rugged beau.
And the next thing you knew, Terry was there all the time. They were spending nights and days, and Terry was becoming a part of Regina's life.
But the bad boy is also a bit of a playboy. And he's not spending all his time with Regina. He's seeing other women on the slide.
Terry had been involved with what we would kind of look at or label as maybe vulnerable women.
Top on Terry's list is Tanya Ingram. And like Regina, she's a single mother of 3, but she's also a grandmother of 4.
Well, Regina thought she was having a nice home with the man she loved. Not only was Terry hooking up and having sex with her, but he was also hooking up with the grandmother as well, and neither one knew about each other.
One chilly December morning, Regina sees her kids off to school. She kisses her love goodbye and heads out to run a few errands before work.
While Regina was away, Terry decided that he wanted to play.
Terry met up with Tanya. He accompanied Tanya while she was running several errands.
And I think by all appearances, it looked as though they were a couple and they were quite chummy that day.
Tired of shopping, Terry's ready to get Tanya alone. With the kids at school and Regina at work, he knows her house is empty. So he suggests they head over there.
Terry and Tanya didn't have a vehicle, so they rode the bus a couple different times that day to different places.
At some point, Terry talks Tanya into going to Regina's house. I don't know that Tanya knew that that was Regina's house, but there's no question that they ended up there in the early afternoon.
Terry decided they were going to have sex before Regina got home.
And the hot and heavy lovers don't even make it to the bedroom. They get down to business right on the couch in Regina's living room.
He had the audacity to bring another woman into Regina's house. Who knows why Terry would do something so stupid, so disrespectful? Maybe he got a thrill from being able to manipulate the situation, or maybe subconsciously he wanted to get caught.
And just as things are getting interesting, Terry hears a car door slam.
At that point, Terry encourages Tanya to run down into the basement.
Unless
Tanya met Regina, all hell was going to break loose.
With Regina standing just a few feet above their heads, Terry runs out of patience.
Stop being so loud!
He grabbed his arm around her throat, put her in a chokehold, and just kept squeezing.
While attempting to keep her quiet, he strangles Tanya with one arm and puts his free hand over her nose and mouth to silence her.
She's reaching up, trying to scratch his face to get him off of her.
Tanya was fighting for her life.
The two struggle for a few moments, but Tanya is no match for Terry's sheer force.
He had just killed Tanya. Her body is just laying there on the floor in the basement.
Meanwhile, Regina is upstairs changing into her work uniform and hears nothing.
She only entered the house for 1 or 2 minutes before she went to work.
The killer ex-con is now alone in the house with a serious situation on his hands.
He was essentially stuck at that house with a dead body and just was trying desperately to find a way to get himself out of there and possibly the body as well.
Regina works a hard day at the diner, and the single mom has no idea of the horrors that have unfolded in her basement. Before she heads home, her phone starts lighting up.
he texts Regina while she's at work and tells Regina, I need your help, I need it fast. And they go from there.
When she asks why, Terry admits that he's done something bad. And without her, he's going to jail. And the texts keep coming.
One of the messages had to do with him wanting her to get a truck, and he also sent a message wanting to know how down she was with him.
Although Terry had killed Tanya all by himself, here he is texting Regina, basically bringing her into this, trying to get her to help him clean up his mess.
And the devoted girlfriend doesn't hesitate.
Once Terry asked her for help, she dove right in. After Regina left work, she got a red SUV from another friend of hers, and then she goes right back to her house. He asked, she helped.
When Regina arrives at her house, Terry has no choice but to show his woman what he's done.
But you got my back, right?
Once Regina got to the basement, she saw her man, Terry, standing over the lifeless body of this woman she didn't even know. At that point, Terry started singing this sad song to Regina, telling her that Tanya was trying to break them up and he was trying to keep things together. He laid it on real thick, and Regina believed him.
With her children due back from school at any moment, Regina knew she had to act, and act fast.
She knew she had to deal with the dead body that was in the basement, so she called her son's girlfriend over to babysit the kids while her and Terry figured out their next move.
In need of help and a plan, Regina and her killer boyfriend head out to do some scheming at the one place where they do their best thinking.
They thought going out to bars would help them find out if any of their friends or family were out, and then that they could, obtain some help.
Right away, the couple finds someone they can trust.
They run into a relative of Terry's, a man named Antoine. Terry decides that he's going to let Antoine in on the fact that he needs help.
Antoine agrees, but the couple keep him in the dark about what exactly he's signing up for.
It wasn't until they arrived back at Regina's house and ended up back down in the basement that Antoine learned that what he was going to be helping with was the removal of a body.
Terry was a hardcore criminal. He had street cred. So we don't know if Antoine maybe felt that if he didn't go along with the plan, he was going to be hurt, or if he was just trying to help his friends deal with this situation that they were now in.
With Terry barking out orders, the cleanup crew gets busy. Regina is all too willing to do whatever she can to help her man clean up his mess.
Once they got into the basement, Regina, instead of backing out, she went to Tanya's body and started clipping her nails.
They cut the fingernails off the victim so that DNA couldn't be found underneath her nails.
They had stripped Tanya's body. They collected those clothes and clothes that had been worn by Terry at some point in time with his contact with Tanya and placed those all in a plastic grocery bag.
With the cleanup complete, there's the tough task of getting the body out of the basement.
At that point in time, Regina retrieves a shower curtain from the bathroom upstairs and brings it down to the basement.
They then wrapped her in the shower curtain and attempted to carry her body up the stairs, through the kitchen, out the back door.
Terry and Regina loaded Tanya up inside the SUV. Now, at this point, Antoine must have been freaked out by it all and said, "I've had enough, I'm out."
Antoine leaves the couple to handle the rest. They drive off into the darkness.
Regina helped Terry try to clean up this crime scene because she was really devoted to him. She would do anything, even becoming part of a murder scene.
In the early morning hours, they drive around town, looking for a remote place to dump the body. But they're running out of time.
They had been working through the night, so the sun was about to come out. And the last thing they wanted to do was be caught in a car in the daylight with a body inside. So they panicked.
They pull over and simply dump the body on the side of the road. Then, she watches as Terry douses his victim in gasoline.
And then he just set her on fire.
With the cleanup now complete, they take off. But it's not long before motorists come across the chilling scene.
Eventually, people start to notice something is on fire alongside the road. One of those individuals finally calls 911.
Delaware County 911.
Yeah, there is a person burning. She's dead, she's laying there, she's on fire.
Police respond to the multiple calls, and when they arrive at the intersection, they find a grisly scene.
Tanya's body was actually wrapped up in a shower curtain, and that's how she was disposed of, and that's how she was set afire. When the police first were called, her body was burning. The police actually had to use a fire extinguisher to put out the fire.
In a city the size of Muncie, you have crimes that happen, but there was never a murder this brutal where a woman was killed, her body dumped on side of the road and then set on fire.
After helping him clean his mess the night before, Regina drops Terry off at his uncle's and returns home. Later that morning, she sits in her house alone, and the severity of the situation sinks in.
After Regina realized what she had done, she decided to take action.
Regina decides that she's actually going to go to the police and tell them that she had been forced to help Terry move this body.
So she called up her babysitter, and she had the babysitter come and get her kids and get them out of the house. Regina actually, still wearing the bloody clothes from the night before, walked to the police station. By the time she got there, she was sweating. She was a nervous wreck.
Police question her, and Regina wastes no time in giving up her boyfriend to police. She might have been down during the cleanup, but now her devotion to her man is all but done.
He said, "Look, you gotta swear to God you will not flip out on me if I tell you this." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "There's a body in your basement we gotta get rid of."
At that point, she doesn't care what happens to Terry. As long as he doesn't drag her down with him, it's all right with her. She just wants to save her own skin.
Okay.
I'm tired.
I know. Yeah, I am too. So, let's go back. You go to help. What goes on from there?
Just continue trying to drag her up the stairs.
Regina went to the cops because she just wanted to beat Terry to the punch. And I think this speaks to the fact that he no longer had that power over her that he once did. The spell was broken.
And the longer investigators question her, the more frantic she becomes.
I don't know who she is. I don't know where she came from. I don't know why she's there. I didn't know what to do. I was scared.
She was hysterical, she was upset, and she was portraying to us that she was a victim of this.
That afternoon, police hunt all around Muncie, looking for Terry Rutledge.
They began searching the area around where Regina lived. They spot a vehicle that's actually being driven by his uncle, and he's riding in the passenger seat. As the officers are approaching the car, Terry exits the car and takes off running, and they have to tackle him and restrain him at that point.
When Terry is brought in for questioning, he has no concern for Regina. The ex-con has one thing on his mind: stay out of prison.
Terry's version of events changed multiple times. It was hard to follow along with the information he was giving us.
That's not even my house, that's her house. So I had nothing to do with that.
In one of the statements Terry gave to police, he actually blamed Regina for killing Tanya.
There's just one problem. Regina, who is in the next room over, can hear every word of Terry's lies.
I came to see what it was, and she already had the body down there. I don't know nothing about that.
In our office, we have very thin walls, and it's a problem that's been tried to be rectified for quite some time.
She's furious at Terry's attempts to pin the entire thing on her.
Terry was giving the police one statement. Regina was giving the police another statement. They weren't coinciding whatsoever, so we just decided to put them face to face with each other.
When Regina arrives at Terry's interview room, they get much more than they bargained for.
She was yelling at him, she was cussing, she was screaming, she was crying.
I'm dead serious. You're gonna do my kids like this for real? Tell me what day this happened on, because I sure the hell wasn't with you. Not up like that, so thank you.
Pretty clear that the love affair was over and that Regina was going to take care of her butt and didn't care what happened to Terry.
Once cooler heads prevail, Regina tells the officers there's someone that can back her side of the story. The man that assisted in the cleanup, Antoine Warren.
She told them about Antoine and how he was involved in all this. Police brought him in for questioning. Antoine didn't hesitate to tell police everything.
Antoine's version of events lines up with Regina's, and police finally believe they have the full story. They arrest both Terry Rutledge and Regina Miller for the murder of Tanya Ingram. In exchange for his cooperation, Antoine is given a plea deal and is given 2 years in prison and 2 years on probation. Terry Rutledge is found guilty on all charges. He is sentenced to 62 years on the murder conviction and 3 years for obstruction of justice. Regina is found guilty on charges of assisting a criminal and obstruction of justice. She is sentenced to 6 years plus an additional 18 months for both charges.
Regina's biggest mistake was being involved with Terry Rutledge in the first place.
This was a story about a woman who would do anything for love, and in the end, love caused her world to come crashing down.
Obviously, Regina wasn't perfect. This was a woman who had very poor self-esteem and therefore made a lot of wrong decisions. That poor self-confidence landed her in the arms of Terry. And in the end, it was this love that led her to her.
After a move to the big city, young Courtney King is certain her luck is about to change when she rolls the dice on love.
She was in love with him and she was following her heart.
But the fire in her soul is quickly snuffed out when her new man rakes her through the coals.
That was certainly no accident.
Everything she did on that night was at Damien's direction.
And in San Diego, California, timid Dorothy Maraglino is as straight-laced as they come.
Dorothy was a rule follower. She had a good home. She craved structure. She craved order.
But when she meets a man who helps her explore her sexual limits, it thrusts her headfirst into a world of pain.
There was a level of violence that went beyond mere fantasy and actually became reality.
Dorothy was very possessive. She put Lewis on a pedestal.
There are hundreds of thousands of women in prison at any given time in the U.S. These are the true stories of women who committed heinous crimes in the name of love. For my man. Born and raised in the suburbs of Houston, Texas, 17-year-old Courtney King is as low-key as her surroundings.
She was pleasant to be around. She was soft-spoken. She had some intelligence to her, but I think she struggled a little bit with her self-esteem.
The shy high school junior has never had a serious boyfriend, but finds all the comfort she needs in the welcoming arms of her family.
Her father and mother were divorced, but were amicably involved with each other and in support of Courtney.
She had two siblings that she was close to and had a lot of love, a lot of support as she grew up.
Following graduation, Courtney looks to branch out within the confines of her tiny community. Though when she fails to put down roots, the now 22-year-old kicks around the idea of moving 30 minutes away to big city Houston.
Courtney had a job working ticket sales at the soccer stadium, but she had just recently been let go. So Courtney was looking for a fresh start.
For someone like Courtney, it was a very daunting thing to go from a small city to a big city. This was something that opened her eyes to interact with others, to explore new horizons.
Just a month after the move, Courtney's new life is already taking off. She quickly lands a job, and shortly after, bumps into Damian Salinas, a handsome young man 2 years her senior.
Damian was really good looking and sometimes relied on those looks to get what he needed.
Although he hasn't been able to charm his way into a job and lives with various family members, Damian's got $1 million smile. And it doesn't take long for the two to become an item.
Courtney didn't know a lot about Damian or his past, but he definitely swept her off her feet.
But when she decides to take her new dish back home for dinner, after just 3 months of dating, her family is left with a bitter taste in their mouths.
There was one instance in which Damian pointed at Courtney and told her to sit down and be quiet. And apparently the family felt that that was indicative of maybe some abusive tendencies in the relationship.
Damian very quickly became a wedge between Courtney and her family members.
Yeah, I will leave. Come on, Damian.
But Courtney's wearing rose-colored glasses, and the pressure from her overbearing family drives her away from them and further into the arms of her lover. Even when he finally comes clean about his record, which includes burglary and property theft.
Courtney was so in love, she didn't care about his criminal record. She was willing to do anything for her man.
I believe she felt like she could change his ways and make him a better person.
Although the hustler has never been able to hold down steady work, he's always found a way to make ends meet. However, he's not one to talk about his business or his pleasure.
Damian did not let Courtney into what he was doing on a daily basis. To a large degree, he did not let her into his life.
And there was a good reason for that. He didn't want her to necessarily know that he maybe had this history of trolling for gay men online.
Despite his shady ways, Courtney doesn't think twice about showering her new slice with gifts, including a cell phone, so they can stay in touch when they're not together.
She didn't do this in order to spy on him or snoop or keep tabs on him. She did this to show him that she could provide him what he couldn't afford himself.
As time goes on, Courtney decides to fund the next stage of their journey, leasing an apartment on the edge of town and immediately moving her man in.
This was really the first time they had a stable home of his own.
But it doesn't take long for the financial pressure to take a toll on the relationship. Damian has no motivation to work, and finding a sugar daddy online has gotten him nowhere. Still, he wants to contribute to their new digs at any cost.
When you're a man who believes in the stereotypical role of being the provider, of being the alpha, and your woman was the sole provider, well, this was a shock to Damian's system. And so he wanted to do anything to be able to get that man card again.
So Damian again hits the internet But on this occasion, he's not just looking for a good time. He wants to become rich.
Damien came up with a plan to solicit gay men online, once again falling back on his good looks. He wanted to lure them in and then rob them.
In just a few clicks, he spots a romantic ad placed by 51-year-old Juanario Rosas, a registered nurse for a renowned cancer center in Houston.
Juanario had recently separated from a long-time relationship. Apparently was in a stage in his life where he was just looking for some casual encounters.
For the next 24 hours, Damien lures Juanario with some sexy texts and emails, and the nurse immediately takes the bait.
They exchanged some banter back and forth and eventually agreed to a meeting.
While Damien finalizes his plans, he makes sure to keep his girlfriend in the dark, as he's done for most of their relationship. Unfortunately, she has no idea what evil acts her man has in store, and that she'll be called on to help.
Courtney would do anything for her lover.
He did his best to put it all on her.
Young Courtney King has broken out of her shell after leaving her small Texas town in pursuit of love and adventure in big city Houston. But after falling for controlling Damien Salinas, her life is about to take a disturbing turn.
Courtney was certain that Damien was the one. She knew that this was the fairy tale guy who would make all of her dreams come true. But little did she know how far she would have to go in order to keep that love that she wanted so badly.
While Courtney spends a quiet Friday night at home, her man arranges a phony first date with the intention of robbing Juanario Rosas, a kind-hearted nurse looking for love on the internet.
She had gone to bed, and Damien had left. She did not know where he'd gone.
On a cool, early autumn night, Damien drives 20 miles to Juanario's upscale home in Pearland, Texas.
Juanario was really excited that Damien was coming over. He got his house ready, he got condoms. He was preparing for a good night.
As the evening begins, the two strike up some awkward chit-chat. However, when the libations start to flow, things become more comfortable.
He was preparing for a really fun night, but he had no idea what he was in store for.
No sooner can Juanario finish unbuttoning his shirt when Damien makes a fist and strikes with menacing intent.
I don't know whether Damien set out to hurt, harm, or kill Mr. Rosas. Whether this was part of some grand plan, only Damien knows.
But Juanario was stronger than he looked. He fought back as hard as he could. As the struggle escalated, Damien grabbed whatever heavy object was nearby and used it to beat Juanario's head in.
The moment he grows weak, Damien reaches for a necktie and viciously ties it around his date's neck. Seconds later, Juanario appears to gasp his last breath.
This was not how Damien planned for this to go. He was completely caught off guard. He is shaken, he is scared, and he realizes he's gonna need some help.
Up until now, Courtney's had no idea what her man had up his sleeve. But shortly after midnight, it becomes disturbingly clear.
She was home, asleep, and received a phone call from Damien to come pick him up.
The when was now, and the where was Juanario's house.
Okay.
Damien didn't give her a request. Damien told her what to do, and Courtney followed direction.
Courtney was at Damien's beck and call. Whatever he needed, whatever he wanted, she gave to him. And this time was no exception. She was going to rush by his side and be there for whatever he needed, and she wasn't going to ask any questions whatsoever.
Once she arrives at Juanario's house, she notices several stacks of items on the front porch. Just then, her boyfriend appears from the front door and hastily orders her to start collecting valuables, with no explanation about the horror upstairs.
Courtney follows her lover's instructions. She begins loading up anything she could find.
Though on the ride back to their apartment, he breaks the news about the assault on Juanario.
As much as Courtney really adored Damien, she knew that he wasn't always on the up and up. But this time, this was something that was even too big for her belief system. And therefore, it was just easier for her to just give him support.
Courtney had an unthinking devotion to Damien, what he wanted and what he needed, and that night was no different.
Back home, The couple weighs their options, trying frantically to come up with a way to make Damien's misdeeds look like a tragic accident.
So they came up with a plan to burn Winario's house down with his body inside.
The pair quickly changes and makes their way back to the crime scene. On the way, they stop at a 24-hour grocery store, and Courtney purchases some supplies, namely lighter fluid, as well as paper plates, soda, and charcoal, to avoid suspicion.
I think that says a lot about her mindset, is that she knew that what she was doing was wrong.
When they get back to Winario's, the duo makes their way to the upstairs bedroom, where they find his motionless body covered in blood.
Get caught.
We're not.
They collected some clothing and placed it in a pile outside the door of the master bedroom, doused it with the lighter fluid, and ignited it.
Just then, as the room goes up in flames, they hear a moan coming from the bed. It's Winario, and he's very much alive.
Dead or not, he wanted to conceal the crime that he had committed.
In Fallbrook, California, Dorothy Maraglino also learns that keeping a man on a leash can lead to a whole lot of hurt.
Dorothy was very protective of Lewis and very jealous.
She had no idea what she was getting herself into.
Just a few hours after robbing and strangling nurse Winario Rosas, Damien Salinas and his unwitting girlfriend, Courtney King, set a fire at his place to cover their tracks, though they're shocked to see the victim is still alive, making the crime even more malicious.
So at this point, a decision had to be made by Courtney. Either she was going to give it up or she was going to follow all the way through with this in order to protect this guy that she loved. And that's exactly what she did.
As Winario moans for help, the two make a dash for the front door as flames engulf the bedroom.
The fire spread very quickly, went up the walls, into the ceiling, even bursting water pipes.
Unfortunately for the suspects, their plans are soon doused.
When the pipe busted, it sent water crashing down onto the fire and basically extinguished the fire. Their actions actually preserved the crime scene. It gave Courtney and Damien a couple days before the body was discovered.
But 2 days later, as the murderous couple hides out at their place, Winario's colleagues at the medical center grow concerned.
Pearland police were summoned to the victim's home to do a welfare check by some of his co-workers when the victim failed to show up for his shift at work.
Immediately after arriving, officers notice an acrid odor seeping from the home. As they enter the unlocked front door and make their way through the house, they quickly discover the source of the smell.
When they got upstairs, they found a disturbing crime scene. They saw piles of burnt clothing, bottles of lighter fluid. At this point, they suspected arson.
Just then, they spot Winario's lifeless body on the bed. Whatever happened to him was undoubtedly intentional.
Around the victim's body, we located several pieces of a broken wall sconce that we believe was used to strike the victim several times. He also had a necktie wrapped around his neck.
Investigators move swiftly to obtain Winario's cell phone records and notice several calls and texts from one particular number in the days leading up to his death. It's Courtney King's, though she bought the phone for her boyfriend.
Damien's cell phone was in the area of their home until roughly about 8:30, at which point it began tracking back towards Pearland and was in the Pearland area for the next several hours.
Hoping for some answers, investigators rush to dial in on the phone owner. And 5 days later, they locate her at the apartment she shares with Damien in Houston. Though before they make it to Courtney's doorstep, her man leaves her high and dry.
At some point in time, Damien fled the scene prior to us arriving.
Where are you going?
Damien showed his true colors. He was a coward, and he wasn't going to be there for Courtney the way that she was there for him.
When questioned, Courtney maintains her innocence, claiming she has no idea who Winario is or how her boyfriend is connected to him.
Her answers were very generic, very minimal.
If you have any information about...
But when investigators tell her they're working a homicide case and this is serious, Courtney goes silent, then asks for something unexpected.
Pen and paper?
She requested a piece of paper and a pen, and she scribbled something down, and she had written, "If you're asking if he did it, yes." It was pretty evident to me that she was referring to the murder.
She just couldn't verbalize the unspeakable horror. She could not be able to put into words what the man she loved had done to this innocent person, to this victim. She could only bleed them out by writing them.
Courtney is immediately taken to the PD for further questioning. She's visibly hurt that Damien left her at the mercy of police, and decides if she's going down, he's coming with her.
She confessed to everything she knew about Damien's crime, her role in it, and the cover-up.
Throughout this relationship, it really had felt to Courtney like it was her and this guy against the world. But she realized it wasn't true any longer, that he had thrown her under the bus, he had run out of the place and left her on her own, so now she had to take care of herself.
Detectives work feverishly to find their prime suspect. And when they release his information to the public, the wanted criminal turns himself in 7 days after Wenario's death. Under the interrogation room lights, Damien doesn't think twice about turning the tables on his girlfriend.
Damien confessed insofar that he said he contributed to Wenario's death, but it was all colored under the ruse that it was Courtney that set up this encounter. It was Courtney that initially attacked Wenario.
But police know the truth.
The evidence contradicts Damien's story of Courtney being the one to be in contact with Wenario, of Courtney being with Damien the entire time they were with Wenario, as well as the phone messages that strongly indicate are from Damien and not from Courtney.
A year after Wenario's murder, Damien changes his tune and pleads guilty to felony arson and murder. He's sentenced to 50 years in prison with the possibility of parole. For her role in the crime, Courtney pleads guilty to felony arson and burglary of a habitation and is sentenced to 15 years in prison.
She made a choice to do the things that she did, and she's ultimately responsible for them. But everything she did on that night was at Damien's direction.
Behind bars, she has shown repentance for her actions, not to mention getting involved with a guy like Damien.
She was absolutely remorseful, absolutely regretful. She felt terrible for having been in this relationship, for the effect that it had on her family, and for what happened to Mr. Rosas. I am sure not a day goes by she doesn't think about it and regret it.
It was evident that Courtney was more in love with Damien than Damien was in love with her.
Courtney's dreams of love quickly went up in smoke when she followed her man straight into the fire. In Fallbrook, California, Dorothy Maraglino also finds out that being tied down by a man can land you in a world of hurt. Raised in Fallbrook, California, just 45 minutes north of San Diego, Dorothy Maraglino is a ray of sunshine to her friends and family.
Dorothy was a rule follower, a good student. She had a good home. She was pretty much an ideal child.
Religion played a big role in her life, and there was that sense of devotion, I think, that was instilled in her at a very young age that she continued to practice with respect to her friendships and her relationships.
By 18, the sheltered girl has never had a serious boyfriend, but marvels at how her friends snicker about their exploits.
Young girls can be very impressionable when they hear their peers talking, especially when it's about experiences that they really haven't engaged in or never perhaps even heard about. So it can become something that's very interesting, very exhilarating, something that's very attractive.
Following graduation, Dorothy heads for college and studies up on what men want. After a string of steady relationships, Dorothy lands herself a husband and a house at age 27. But thanks to a lackluster sex life, the 3-year marriage is short-lived, and Dorothy is left empty inside.
There was a real sense of inadequacy that she felt once that marriage ended, and so she was looking to fulfill that sense of inadequacy through something else.
Like most people, she begins by surfing the internet, looking for like-minded people. And soon, her plain Jane ways become too vanilla, even for her.
As she got older, As she became a woman, something changed. She became less stellar, and she was left wondering, what is life all about? Is this all there is?
After tasting a few dishes, she's ready for a partner whom she can relinquish all control to.
Now to be exposed to this sort of new underground was something that really caught her eye, something that intrigued her, something that she thought perhaps she might be able to fit into.
So it doesn't take long for the now 25-year-old to fall headfirst into the world of BDSM, a group who enjoy their pleasure served with a side of agony.
BDSM stands for bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism.
Within this community, there's a sexual element, but it's not all about the sexual encounter. There is this power exchange of the person who likes to inflict pain interacting with the person who likes to receive pain.
But the real hurt is just beginning when Dorothy crosses paths with a dominant who promises to make her most twisted dreams come true.
Contractually and in terms of their relationship, she promised to serve him without reservation.
There was a level of violence that went beyond mere fantasy and actually became reality.
After dipping her toe in the secret waters of sadistic bondage in Fallbrook, California, submissive Dorothy Maraglino finally feels like the woman she's always fantasized of becoming.
It didn't take long for her to jump into the deep end of the pool. Before, she had been very reserved in her personality, crave structure, but when she got into this community of this sexual deviancy, she pretty much went whole hog.
And when she meets Luis Perez while scrolling through an online S&M chat room, her world is turned completely upside down.
Luis is a 45-year-old staff sergeant in the Marines. He was married at the time, living with his wife. However, he also had a secret life. What that secret life was he practiced the BDSM lifestyle.
After exchanging a few messages, Dorothy is instantly smitten and hopes to get to know him more intimately, even though he's still wearing his ring.
She knew he had a wife. Apparently, the relationship was strained, so it didn't seem to be a source of contention.
After a few weeks of exploring their limitations in person, they enter into a contractual relationship, promising to fulfill their darkest desires.
He was referred to as Master Ivan, indicating his relationship to Dorothy, who is also known as Dee.
A few nights a week, Luis would go to Dorothy's house. And when he went there, they would engage in play. This play involves spiked gloves called vampire gloves, knives, needles, whips, anything and everything to inflict pain.
But after just 1 year, Dorothy decides to take a different kind of risk by opening her home to not just Luis, but other members of her underground community.
It included other master-slave relationships. People who were allowed to come into her house and live in her house. It might be another couple, for example, another male-female couple who lived there and participated in various types of activities.
5 years into their relationship, Dorothy is happy as can be, even though her partner is still living with his wife. Though deep down, she longs for a slave of her own. And when she approaches her master, he's quick to sign off.
She put out a personal ad very similar to the one she had responded to years before with Luis.
And when unemployed 24-year-old Jessica Lopez answers the call, their world changes forever.
When Jessica came across that ad, she was intrigued, and they set up a date to meet.
After some chit-chat, Dorothy agrees that Jessica is a perfect fit for their unorthodox lifestyle, as long as she agrees to the terms they decide on.
Dorothy would be submissive to Luis when he was present in the household. But when he wasn't, which was quite frequently because he was married, Dorothy was the one who ran that household.
Jessica was the perfect fit in this hierarchy. She was only eager to please and eager to serve.
Though according to the contract, her job is to strictly serve Dorothy, not Lewis, while living out her wildest fantasies.
There was cutting. There was tasting of blood. All of these things, there was needle play in which blood was drawn, and they would taste the blood. There were no limits.
And the thing they enjoy most is writing letters to one another, detailing their most sadistic requests.
She and Jessica began to write detailed letters fantasizing about kidnapping women.
When someone has been leading a life where they've had no excitement, that's just simply just black and white, there's no longer any color for them, then they will tend to go in the opposite direction to find something that can make them feel alive again.
But all good things must come to an end. When 6 months into the trio's arrangement, Dorothy finds out she's pregnant with Lewis's child.
She no longer hosted these large BDSM parties. She took down her sex dungeon that she had inside her home. And it was at that time that both her and Lewis were looking forward to raising a child together.
Unfortunately, Dorothy still has a contractual obligation to keep her master satisfied. She knows Lewis has a taste for instilling fear in his submissives. So she pens to Jessica her most macabre letter yet, hoping she'll help give him the ultimate gift.
To compensate for the fact that Dorothy could not engage in a lot of the S&M play that she had been engaging in, these letters evolved into a place so dark, they started talking about how to get rid of their victims after they used them.
Unfortunately, putting pen to paper is no longer cutting it. She decides that the only way to keep her master satisfied is to make their words come to life and tell Lewis they're going to kidnap a new slave.
This was a role play. It was enjoyable. It was adult consent. People weren't really getting hurt. But now, introducing this idea of actually kidnapping someone against their will, now that took it to the next level.
The trio's first step is choosing a victim. So they make a list composed of acquaintances both in and outside of the BDSM community. But Dorothy soon realizes they've already befriended the perfect target, 22-year-old knockout Brittany Kilgore.
Brittany was married to a Marine. She was living in the area while her husband was deployed to Afghanistan.
Brittany was not a participant in the BDSM lifestyle. And so her interactions with both Dorothy and Jessica were more of the normal interactions that there would be between neighbors.
The mistress and slave immediately set up a coffee date to catch up with their potential prey. And when Brittany confides in them that she's divorcing her husband and planning to leave town while he's deployed, it seals the deal.
She was vulnerable, she was alone. It was the perfect storm for taking advantage of her.
With Brittany in their crosshairs, Dorothy is ready to make good on her pledge, to keep Lewis happy at any cost.
She was the perfect slave. She was the perfect patsy.
Dorothy became consumed with this need to please her man.
In Fallbrook, California, Dorothy Maraglino has enlisted her slave, Jessica Lopez, to help kidnap an unwitting victim to please her master, Luis Perez.
As far as this BDSM community, they knew that Lewis, Jessica, and Dorothy were perhaps really to the extreme. But what they hadn't realized was that these individuals wanted to take it to a place that perhaps they could not come back.
After meeting a friend, Brittany Kilgore, for coffee, they decide she'd be the perfect sacrifice. And when the women return home and tell Lewis about their recent interaction, he couldn't be more excited by the idea of having Brittany on the chopping block.
Lewis was very attracted to Brittany. She was young, she was good looking. Lewis liked the idea of inflicting this kind of pain and making this young woman a victim, so he bought into Dorothy's plan.
On a sunny April morning, Brittany is at her place, packing to move back home to Pennsylvania. Just then, she hears an unexpected knock on the door. It's her friend Lewis, and he's bummed because he has 2 tickets to a dinner cruise, and Dorothy's too ill from her pregnancy to make it. When Brittany balks at the invitation, Lewis gives her the phone and tells her to contact Dorothy directly.
Dorothy says, yeah, go ahead and go. and gives her permission to go on the dinner cruise. However, no tickets were ever purchased.
She reluctantly agrees, and that night, Lewis picks her up, dressed to the nines. But just minutes down the road, he mentions there's been a change of plans.
He says, oh, the cruise is gone. It left the dock. We missed it. But I have a magazine back at home that has plenty of ideas for the evening. Let's go back to the house and figure out some evening plans.
Brittany says okay, but deep down, she senses there's trouble brewing and frantically starts texting her roommate.
The first text message that really caused Brittany's friend to be concerned about her safety was a message that simply read, "Help."
Before her pal can respond, Lewis spins the SUV into Dorothy's driveway, though his two partners in crime are at the grocery store, unsure when Lewis would be bringing Brittany home. Just then, without warning, Lewis pulls out a stun baton he'd hidden under the driver's seat and sends 80,000 volts into Brittany's neck. As Brittany lay incapacitated, her phone begins to vibrate, forcing her attacker to think fast.
Lewis responded on Brittany's phone. He sent text messages to her friends that said, everything's okay, I'm fine.
Having bought himself some time, Lewis grabs his victim and drags her inside. Brittany comes to as Dorothy and her sub return from the store. She moans and pleads for her life when she sees the women, but it only arouses the slave master more.
Dorothy could see that this turned Lewis on, and she was pleased that once again, she was an instrument of some pleasure for her man.
For the next 3 hours, the trio uses handcuffs, wires, knives, and gags to torture their victim, getting off on her pain. When they feel she's had enough, the group ends Brittany's suffering once and for all.
They put something around her neck, applied such force to the neck that it broke her voice box inside and ultimately killed her by strangulation.
Exhausted from the brutal attack, the lovers feverishly form a plan to get rid of Brittany's body.
They put her in a tarp, then they drove around Riverside County looking for a spot to dump the body.
They drove near a large lake, and then they dumped her body by the side of the road.
With the deed done, the group callously returns to business as usual.
It's hard to know exactly what was going through their minds after they murdered Brittany, but what they did was they went back home, they cleaned up the mess, and the next morning, they went back to life as if nothing had happened.
Little do they know, Brittany's roommate, who received the suspicious texts, has contacted police to report her missing after she never came home the night before. And she knows Lewis is responsible.
What Lewis didn't know is that Brittany's friend had been in a back bedroom when he came over to invite her on the dinner cruise. She heard almost everything, and what she could tell police was that the last time she saw Brittany, she had left with Lewis.
When push comes to shove, will Dorothy stand by her man or her woman? Ties will be put to the test as police close in on the tight-knit trio of paramours.
Dorothy was very possessive and created great friction between them.
She would do anything for her lover, even take the blame herself.
After murdering Brittany Kilgore and dumping her body along a rural Fallbrook, California roadside, lovers Dorothy Maraglino, Luis Perez, and Jessica Lopez think they're in the clear.
I don't know what they thought it might accomplish. Perhaps the ultimate sexual satisfaction for the trio. But in reality, where was this going to go?
Unfortunately, the walls start closing in after Brittany's roommate calls police to report her missing, just 12 hours after she disappeared for a date with the slave master himself.
The next morning, the deputy showed up to investigate the missing person report. He learned that the last person to be with Brittany was Lewis. So he called Lewis on the phone and told Lewis to show up at the apartment complex.
When questioned, Lewis admits he went out with Brittany last night, but swears he dropped her off and never heard from her again.
Lewis's story was that he drove from Fallbrook all the way to downtown San Diego to go on this harbor cruise, which they missed, but instead ended up being in the vicinity of a nightclub, which Brittany actually went into, and he did not.
Detectives are leery of Lewis's account and ask if they can look inside his SUV. Hoping his cooperation will hide his involvement, the slave master foolishly agrees, and investigators are shocked by what they find inside.
They found a stun baton.
It's quickly sent to the lab for processing, while Lewis is taken to the PD for further questioning. He is arrested on an illegal weapons charge, giving police time to build their case.
He was not helpful to the investigation at that point.
Fortunately, not everyone is so tight-lipped. When police ask the media for additional information, they get the spark they've been looking for from an unlikely source. Just 24 hours after Brittany disappeared.
Word spread like wildfire in the BDSM community about this case. And people started coming forward to the police. They started talking about how Dorothy and Lewis had this fantasy, this obsession about kidnapping people.
To see if the rumors are true, investigators head over to Dorothy's house to speak with Mistress D. Unfortunately, their gags are firmly in place as Dorothy stands by her woman and turns on her man.
She told Jessica to follow her lead, and when the police arrived, they denied any involvement with Brittany, and they denied any knowledge of Lewis's date with Brittany.
Detectives don't have enough to hold the women just yet, so they can only return to the station. Meanwhile, the pair is certain police are onto them and immediately plan an exit strategy.
Dorothy and Jessica went to a hotel room in an area called Point Loma in San Diego, and Dorothy was preparing to leave the state.
Before she heads out, Dorothy tells Jessica how scared she is of losing custody of her and Lewis's child once it's born.
The next morning, she takes her flight and goes to the East Coast, leaving Jessica, the slave, behind in the hotel room that they were staying in.
Jessica can't deal with seeing her master in distress and says she'll do anything to help. So she pens a letter to authorities, taking full blame for Brittany's disappearance. After signing the document, she pulls a knife from her suitcase and slashes her wrists, but not before dialing 911.
She was ecstatic that she could give Dorothy something that no one else could, which was the ultimate sacrifice, giving her life so that Dorothy could have freedom.
When the detectives enter the hotel room, they see not only the bloody body of Jessica, but there's a note, and that 7-page letter was a chilling, detailed account of the murder and torture of Brittany, as well as specific location where the body was.
In the letter, Jessica claims Lewis and Dorothy are completely innocent.
She was extremely loyal, extremely obedient. She made it very clear that in her mind, Dorothy was the perfect mistress, and she did not want to lose that affection.
But police know she couldn't have acted alone. And after rushing Jessica to the hospital and placing her under arrest, they focus their attention on finding Dorothy. A month later, the cunning mistress returns to a different San Diego hotel room, only to find investigators have been tracking her every move through cell phone pings and credit card transactions.
The police have her under surveillance. They go to the hotel where she's at. They place her under arrest for murder.
Even though Jessica tried to take the fall, the trio is charged with conspiracy to kidnap, kidnapping, murder, torture, and attempted sexual battery of Brittany. They each maintain their innocence, including Jessica, who now claims she was forced to write the telling letter by her mistress, and place their fates in the hands of a panel of peers.
And the jury convicted all 3 defendants of all charges with the exception of Jessica. She was not convicted of the crime of conspiracy.
For their heinous crime, the 3 are given life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the end, Dorothy and Lewis remain loyal to each other and show no remorse for their deplorable actions.
This is just a tragic, tragic case that involves people who are lonely, people who are seeking fulfillment in some very dark places. You add violence in there, you add sex, you add insecurities, and it's a perfect recipe for tragedy.
We'll probably never know why